The rain fell over Chicago like a curtain of grey silk, washing the streets clean of the day's sins, while hiding new ones in the shadows. Somewhere in the city, a woman had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a half-written article and a name that no one dared to speak aloud. Her name was Elena Marchetti, and she had been chasing the biggest story of her career. Now she was gone, and the only clue left behind pointed to a man known in whispered circles as the King of the North. Side? Mia Lawson stood at the window of her apartment, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears on a mourning face. Her hands trembled as she held the last text message her sister had sent 3 days ago. Just 2 words that now felt like a warning from beyond silence. Trust him. That was all Elena had written before vanishing into the Chicago night, leaving Mia with nothing but questions and a growing fear that wrapped around her chest like cold iron. She was a high school teacher, not a detective. She spent her days explaining Shakespeare to teenagers who would rather scroll through their phones than understand the weight of Hamlet's grief. But now she found herself standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than any tragedy she had ever taught. Her sister was missing, and the police had all but closed the case after 48 hours. They said Elena had probably run off with a source, that journalists sometimes did that when stories got too hot. They were wrong. Mia knew her sister better than anyone. Elena never ran from anything. She ran toward it head first, heart open, pen ready to expose whatever truth she found hiding in the dark. If she had stopped writing, it was because someone had made her stop. And now Mia had to find out who. The apartment was small but filled with memories. Photographs of the 2 sisters covered every available surface, moments frozen in time when life was simpler. There was Elena at her college graduation. Her smile so wide it seemed to light up the entire frame. There was Mia and Elena at their parents' cabin in Wisconsin, bundled in sweaters, hot chocolate warming their hands. And there, in the corner of the bookshelf, was the photo that hurt the most to look at. Elena on the day she got her first byline at the Chicago Tribune, holding the newspaper like a trophy she had spent her whole life earning. That woman did not simply disappear. Someone had taken her, or worse. Mia turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen table where she had spread out everything she had managed to gather from Elena's apartment. The police had let her take a box of personal items, things they deemed irrelevant to their half-hearted investigation. But Mia saw what they had missed. She saw the pattern. There were notes scribbled on napkins, names she did not recognize connected by arrows and question marks. There were photographs of buildings she had never seen, warehouse districts and loading docks, that spoke of secrets exchanged under cover of darkness. And there, buried beneath a stack of old receipts, was a single business card. It was black, made of paper so thick it felt more like cloth, with embossed silver letters that spelled out a name, Dominic Caruso. Her heart stopped when she read it. Everyone in Chicago knew that name, even if most people pretended they did not. Dominic Caruso was the kind of man that newspapers wrote about in careful, coded language, the kind of man that prosecutors dreamed of indicting but never could. He ran an empire that stretched from the lakefront to the western suburbs, a network of businesses, both legitimate and otherwise, that had made him one of the most powerful men in the city. Some called him a businessman, others called him a monster. Most simply called him the Don, and Elena had been investigating him. Mia felt the fear rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Fear was a luxury she could not afford right now. Her sister was out there somewhere, and this man, this shadow king of Chicago's underworld, was the only thread connecting her to the truth. She had to pull it, even if it meant unraveling everything she thought she knew about the world. She picked up her phone and dialed the number on the back of the card. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, deep and measured, like someone who had long ago learned that power did not require volume. The voice asked who was calling. Mia's mouth went dry. She had not expected anyone to actually answer. She cleared her throat and forced the words out, her voice steadier than she felt. She said she was looking for information about her sister, Elena Marchetti. She said Elena had been investigating something, and now she was missing. She said the police would not help, so she was doing this herself. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice spoke again, this time with something that might have been curiosity. The voice told her to come to the Caruso Foundation Gala tomorrow night at the Langham Hotel. The voice said she would find answers there, if she was brave enough to look for them. The line went dead. Mia stared at the phone in her hand, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in the silent apartment. She had just contacted one of the most dangerous men in Chicago, and he had invited her into his world. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to forget about the card, to let the police handle it, even if they never would. But then she looked at the photograph on the bookshelf, at Elena's smile, at the sister who had spent her life chasing truth no matter where it led. If Elena could be brave, then so could she. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation and panic. Mia called in sick to work, something she had never done in 7 years of teaching. She went to a department store downtown and bought a dress that cost more than her monthly rent, a deep burgundy gown that made her feel like someone else entirely, someone who belonged in ballrooms instead of classrooms. She practiced what she would say, how she would introduce herself, how she would ask questions, without revealing how terrified she truly was. By the time the sun set on that second day, she was standing in front of the mirror in her bathroom, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elegant twist. Her makeup was subtle but striking, highlighting the green of her eyes, the eyes she shared with Elena. She looked like a woman with secrets of her own, which she supposed she now was. The Langham Hotel rose from the Chicago skyline like a monument to old money and new power. Its marble floors reflected the glitter of crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and whispered deals. Mia stepped through the gilded doors and felt immediately out of place, a sparrow who had somehow wandered into a cage of peacocks. But she lifted her chin and walked forward anyway. The ballroom was vast, filled with hundreds of people in tuxedos and gowns, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings like the tinkling of champagne glasses. A string quartet played softly in one corner, and waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked more like art than food. This was a world Mia had only ever seen in movies, a world where fortunes changed hands over handshakes and futures were decided between sips of wine. She scanned the crowd, searching for a face she had only seen in newspaper photographs. Dominic Caruso, the man who might know what happened to her sister. And then she saw him. He stood near the far end of the room, surrounded by a small group of men in expensive suits. Even from a distance, he commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with his height or the breadth of his shoulders. It was something in his posture, in the way he held himself like someone who had never known a moment of doubt. His dark hair was combed back from a face that might have been handsome if it were not so severe, all sharp angles and watchful eyes. Those eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and deep and impossible to read. Mia felt her pulse quicken as she approached. Every step felt like walking deeper into a forest, where the trees themselves might be watching. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Elena was counting on her. She was 10 feet away when one of the men beside him noticed her, approached and stepped forward, his expression hardening into a wall of professional suspicion. He asked if he could help her, his tone suggesting that helping her was the last thing he intended to do. But before Mia could answer, a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. He said to let her through. The man stepped aside immediately, and Mia found herself face to face with Dominic Caruso. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had imagined, his grey eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her feel like he was reading every thought she had ever had, every secret she had ever kept, every fear she had tried to hide behind burgundy silk and borrowed courage. He asked if she was the woman who had called about Elena Marchetti. Mia nodded, not trusting her voice. Something flickered in his eyes then, something that might have been pain or might have been memory. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the same careful attention a scientist might give to an unexpected result. He told her she looked like her. Mia felt the words hit her like a physical blow. He knew Elena. He had seen her face to face, had spoken to her, had perhaps been the last person to see her before she vanished. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, a confirmation that she had been right to come here even as it raised 1,000 new questions. She asked him what he knew. She asked him where her sister was. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle tension that suggested her questions had touched something he would rather have left undisturbed. He told her this was not the place for such conversations. He told her to meet him in the private study on the 3rd floor in 15 minutes. He told her to come alone. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as easily as a shadow dissolving into night. Mia stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Every rational thought screamed that this was a trap, that she was walking willingly into the lion's den, with nothing but her courage and her sister's memory to protect her. But she thought of Elena, of the way her sister had always said that the truth was worth any risk, and she made her decision. 15 minutes later, she stood outside a heavy oak door on the 3rd floor of the hotel, her hand raised to knock. The hallway was silent, empty, the sounds of the gala far below reduced to a distant murmur. She took a deep breath, steadied her trembling hand and knocked. The door opened immediately, as if he had been waiting just on the other side. The study was smaller than she had expected, lined with bookshelves and furnished with leather chairs that looked older than the hotel itself. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was Dominic Caruso. He did not turn around as he spoke. He said he had been expecting this moment for 3 days, ever since Elena had disappeared. He said he knew she would come looking for answers, because that was what Marchetti women did. They never knew when to stop asking questions. Mia stepped into the room, letting the door close behind her. She asked him what he meant by that. She asked him how he knew her sister. Finally, he turned to face her. The firelight caught his features, softening them somehow, revealing the exhaustion that lurked beneath his composed exterior. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, a man carrying a weight that even his considerable strength could barely support. He told her Elena had come to him 2 weeks ago with a story. She was investigating corruption in the city government, tracing payments and bribes that led from City Hall all the way to the federal courts. She had followed the money, as good journalists always did, and the trail had led her to him. Mia felt her hands clench into fists. She said that sounded like Elena was investigating him. He shook his head slowly, his grey eyes never leaving hers. He said no. He said Elena had discovered something far more dangerous than his business. She had discovered that the corruption she was tracking was not coming from him. It was targeting him. Someone was using his name, his reputation, to hide their own crimes. And when Elena had come to him with her evidence, he had made the decision that would change both their lives. He had decided to help her. Mia stared at him, trying to reconcile this version of events with everything she had believed about the man standing before her. He was supposed to be the villain of this story, the monster in the shadows, the reason her sister had vanished. But he was telling her something different. He was telling her that he and Elena had been allies, not enemies. She asked him why she should believe anything he said. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a manila folder thick with documents. He handed it to her without a word. Inside, Mia found pages of evidence that made her head spin. Bank records showing transfers from shell companies to city officials, photographs of meetings between men she recognized from the evening news and men she did not recognize at all. And there, tucked between 2 sheets of financial data, was a note in Elena's handwriting. The note said, "Dominic is not the enemy. He is the only one who can help me bring them down. Trust him." The same 2 words from her sister's final text message. Mia looked up from the folder, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She asked him where Elena was now. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw something like grief cross his features. He said he did not know. He said Elena had gone to meet a source 3 nights ago, someone who promised her the final piece of evidence she needed to publish her story. He had sent 2 of his men to watch over her, to make sure she came back safely. But she never arrived at the meeting. Point. His men had found her car abandoned on a side street in Bridgeport, the engine still running, the driver's door hanging open. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of where she had gone or who had taken her. It was as if she had simply stepped out of reality and vanished. He said he had been searching for her ever since. He said he had resources the police could only dream of, contacts in every corner of the city, men who owed him favors that they would repay with their lives if necessary, but so far he had found nothing. Elena Marchetti had disappeared completely. Mia felt her knees go weak. She reached for the back of a chair to steady herself, her mind refusing to accept what he was telling her. Elena was not supposed to be lost. Elena was supposed to be out there somewhere, waiting to be found, waiting for her little sister to come rescue her the way she had always rescued Mia from childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. But nightmares did not have happy endings, and this was starting to feel like a nightmare she would never wake up from. Dominic watched her with an expression that might have been sympathy, or might have been understanding, or might have been something else entirely. He asked her if she wanted to find her sister. Mia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He said then she would need to trust him. He said the men who had taken Elena were the same men who wanted to destroy him, and they would stop at nothing to silence anyone who threatened their power. If Mia wanted to bring her sister home, she would have to step into a world far more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. He asked her if she was willing to do that. Mia thought of Elena. She thought of the sister who had taught her to ride a bike, who had held her hand at their parents' funeral, who had always believed she could be more than a high school teacher if she just had the courage to try. She thought of the 2 words that had led her here. Trust him. She looked Dominic Caruso in the eye and said yes. Something shifted in his expression then, something that looked almost like respect. He said very well. He said from this moment forward she was under his protection. He said she would stay in one of his properties, where his men could keep her safe while they searched for Elena together. He said he would not lie to her about what they were facing. The enemies they were dealing with were powerful, connected, and ruthless. They had already taken her sister. They would not hesitate to take her too. But he also said something else. He said he made a promise to Elena before she disappeared. He promised he would protect her family no matter what happened, and he intended to keep that promise. Mia did not know what to say. This man, this supposed monster, was offering her something the police never had. He was offering her hope. She asked him why. She asked him why he cared what happened to a journalist who had been investigating his world. He was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes distant, lost in some memory she could not see. Then he said something that surprised her. He said Elena reminded him of his sister. He said he had a younger sister once, years ago, who had that same fire in her eyes, that same refusal to back down from anything. He said she had been taken from him by men not unlike the ones they were facing now, and he had spent every day since then building an empire powerful enough to ensure it never happened again. He said he failed to protect his sister. He would not fail to protect Elena's. Mia felt something shift inside her chest, some wall she had built to keep this dangerous stranger at a distance beginning to crack. She had come here expecting a villain. She had found something far more complicated, a man with wounds as deep as her own, a man who understood loss in a way that most people never would. She did not trust him yet. She was not sure she ever would. But she was beginning to believe that he meant what he said. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If you want to follow this story to the end and discover what really happened to Elena, subscribe now. Stories like this only reach people like you when you join our community. The car ride through nighttime Chicago felt like traveling through another dimension. Mia sat in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows, so dark the city outside looked like a smear of light and shadow. 2 of Dominic's men sat in the front seats, their faces hard and unreadable, their silence speaking louder than words. She was being taken somewhere safe, Dominic had said. Somewhere his enemies could not find her. She still was not sure if she was a guest or a prisoner. They drove north along Lakeshore Drive, the black expanse of Lake Michigan stretching endlessly to her right. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold. Mia had lived in Chicago her entire life, but she had never seen it from this perspective, from behind bulletproof glass in a vehicle that probably cost more than her apartment. After what felt like an hour, the SUV turned onto a private road that wound through tall iron gates and up a hill lined with ancient oak trees. And then, emerging from the darkness like something out of a Gothic novel, she saw the house. It was not a house. It was an estate, a sprawling mansion of grey stone and climbing ivy, its windows glowing with warm light that seemed to promise safety from the cold night outside. Gardens stretched in every direction, dormant now in the late autumn chill, but hinting at the beauty they must hold in spring. A fountain stood in the circular driveway, its water still and silent, reflecting the stars above. This was where Dominic Caruso lived. This was where she would be staying until they found Elena. The SUV stopped at the front entrance, and one of the men came around to open her door. She stepped out onto the gravel drive, her heels sinking slightly, the night air crisp and clean in a way that city air never was. She could smell pine and something floral, a lingering sweetness that seemed impossible in November. The front doors opened before she reached them, and a woman appeared in the entrance. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything about Mia in a single glance. She introduced herself as Rosa, the housekeeper, and welcomed Mia to the Caruso estate. Rosa led her through a foyer that could have housed Mia's entire apartment, past paintings that looked like they belonged in museums, up a sweeping staircase that would have made Scarlett O'Hara weep with envy. The house was old but immaculately maintained, a blend of traditional elegance and modern comfort that spoke of money measured in generations rather than bank statements. Her room was on the second floor, overlooking the back gardens. It was larger than her living room at home, with a four-poster bed draped in cream silk, an antique writing desk by the window, and a fireplace that Rosa immediately set to crackling with warm flames. There was an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub deep enough to swim in, and a closet already stocked with clothing in her size. Mia turned to Rosa with wide eyes. She asked how they had known her size. Rosa smiled softly and said that Mr. Caruso was a man who noticed details. She said he had called ahead to have everything prepared for her arrival. She said if there was anything she needed, anything at all, she only had to ask. Then Rosa left, and Mia was alone. She walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit gardens below. Somewhere out there, beyond these protective walls, her sister was waiting to be found, and somewhere in this house a man she barely knew had promised to help her. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the armchair by the fire, wrapped in a cashmere throw that was softer than anything she had ever owned, and studied the documents Dominic had given her. The more she read, the more she understood the danger Elena had stumbled into. The corruption was deep, far deeper than anything Elena's article had hinted at. It was not just city officials taking payments. It was a network that stretched from the Chicago Police Department to the Cook County courts to the state legislature in Springfield. There were judges who dismissed cases in exchange for favors. There were prosecutors who buried evidence for the right price. There were police captains who looked the other way when certain shipments moved through certain ports. And at the center of it all was a name Mia did not recognize: Victor Ashford. She searched her memory, trying to place the name, but came up empty. He was not a politician or a businessman she had ever heard of, but according to Elena's notes, he was the puppet master pulling all the strings, the invisible hand that controlled the corruption. From behind a facade of respectability, Elena had been close to exposing him. That was why she had disappeared. Morning came slowly, grey light seeping through the windows to replace the warmth of the fire. Mia had not realized she had dozed off until a soft knock at the door startled her awake. She straightened in the chair, her neck aching from the awkward position, and called for whoever it was to come in. It was Rosa, carrying a tray with fresh coffee, pastries, and a small vase with a single white rose. She said Mr. Caruso was waiting for her in the study downstairs whenever she was ready. She said breakfast would be served in the dining room if she preferred something more substantial. She said she hoped Miss Mia had slept well. Mia thanked her and took the coffee gratefully, the hot liquid warming her from the inside out. She showered quickly, changed into clothes from the mysteriously stocked closet, a simple sweater and slacks that fit perfectly, and made her way downstairs. The study was different in daylight. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound books and a massive desk covered with papers and maps. Dominic stood by one of the windows, his back to her, watching the gardens outside. He spoke without turning around. He said he had his men working through the night. He said they had found something. Mia's heart leapt into her throat. She asked what they had found. He turned to face her then, and she was struck, again by the intensity of his grey eyes, by the way they seemed to see straight through her. He said Elena's source, the person she was supposed to meet the night she disappeared, was a man named Thomas Pierce. He was an accountant who had worked for Victor Ashford for 15 years. He had decided to turn whistleblower after discovering the true extent of Ashford's crimes. He had reached out to Elena through an anonymous tip line at the Tribune. Dominic said Thomas Pierce was found that morning, in his apartment on the south side. He was no longer among the living. Mia felt the color drain from her face. She asked what had happened to him. Dominic said it had been made to look like natural causes. A heart attack, according to the initial report. But his men had contacts at the coroner's office. The truth was different. Pierce had been silenced permanently, probably before Elena even had a chance to meet him, which meant whoever took Elena had known about the meeting in advance. They had known the time, the place, everything. Someone close to Eleanor or Pierce had betrayed them both. Mia sank into one of the leather chairs, her mind spinning. Her sister was out there, in the hands of people who had already demonstrated they were willing to silence anyone who threatened their secrets. And now the one person who might have been able to help them was gone. She asked Dominic what they were going to do. He walked to his desk and picked up a file folder, similar to the one he had given her the night before. He said Pierce was not the only one who knew Ashford's secrets. He said there was someone else, someone higher up in Ashford's organization, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. This person had reached out to Dominic through back channels, offering information in exchange for protection. A meeting was scheduled for that evening, and Dominic wanted Mia to come with him. She stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. She asked why he wanted her there. He said the contact had asked to meet Elena's sister specifically. He said the contact would not trust anyone else. He said this person had information about where Elena might be, but they would only share it face to face. Mia thought about what he was asking. He was asking her to walk into another potentially dangerous situation, to meet with someone who moved in circles far more treacherous than any she had ever known. He was asking her to trust him again. But what choice did she have? She said yes. She said she would go with him. Something that might have been approval flickered across his features. He said they would leave at sunset. He said until then, she should rest, eat something, prepare herself for what was coming. He said the next few days would demand more from her than anything she had ever faced before. Then he returned his attention to the papers on his desk, dismissing her without another word. Mia left the study and wandered through the mansion, trying to make sense of the world she had fallen into. Every room she passed spoke of wealth and power, but also of something else. There were photographs on the walls, not of dignitaries or celebrities, but of children. Hundreds of children in graduation gowns and soccer uniforms and holiday costumes, their smiles bright against backdrops of schools and community centers. She found Rosa in the kitchen, preparing something that smelled like heaven, and asked about the photographs. Rosa's face softened with pride. She said those were the children from the Caruso Foundation. She said Mr. Caruso had started it 20 years ago, after his sister passed. She said the foundation provided scholarships, after-school programs, job training, everything the kids on the south side and west side needed but could not afford. She said most people only saw what the newspapers wrote about Mr. Caruso. They saw the darkness. But Rosa had worked for him for 30 years, and she knew the truth. Beneath the reputation, beneath the power, was a man who had never forgotten where he came from. a man who had used his empire to lift up the people the world had forgotten. Mia listened in silence, her understanding of Dominic Caruso shifting yet again. He was not the monster the media painted him to be. He was something far more complex, a man who walked the line between darkness and light, using the tools of one world to protect the people of another. She spent the rest of the day in the estate's library, a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a reading alcove bathed in afternoon sunlight. She lost herself in the familiar comfort of books, trying not to think about what the evening would bring, trying not to imagine where Elena might be at that very moment. But the hours passed too quickly, and before she knew it, the sun was setting over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Rosa appeared at the library door and said it was time. The meeting was set for an old warehouse on the near west side, in a neighborhood that had once been industrial and was now caught between decay and gentrification. Empty buildings stood beside new lofts, their windows dark eyes watching the street below. It was the kind of place where secrets went to hide. Mia rode in the back of the SUV again, but this time Dominic sat beside her. He had changed from his earlier attire into something darker, more practical. A black jacket over a charcoal, shirt, trousers that allowed for movement. He looked like a man preparing for battle, even if the battlefield was a conversation. He briefed her as they drove. He said the contact's name was Sarah Chen. She was Victor Ashford's personal assistant, a position she had held for 7 years. She had seen everything, heard everything, and she was finally ready to talk. He said Sarah was scared. He said she had every right to be. 2 people connected to this situation had already been silenced. She knew she could be next. He said Mia's job was simple. She just had to be herself. She had to show Sarah that they were not here to hurt her, that they just wanted to find Elena and bring down the people responsible. Mia nodded, her mouth too dry for words. The SUV stopped in an alley behind the warehouse. 2 of Dominic's men got out first, scanning the area before giving the all-clear signal. Then Dominic opened his door and offered Mia his hand. She took it without thinking and was surprised by the warmth of his palm, the steadiness of his grip. For a moment, standing in that dark alley with danger lurking in every shadow, she felt something she had not expected. She felt safe. They entered through a side door and climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. The warehouse had been converted into artist studios at some point, small rooms with concrete floors and exposed brick walls, but most were empty now. Only one had light coming from under its door. Dominic knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 more times. A code, Mia realized. The door opened and a woman's face appeared in the gap. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair cut short and eyes that darted nervously from Dominic to Mia and back again. She asked if they were alone. Dominic said yes. He said his men were outside, but no one had followed them. Sarah studied Mia for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside. The room inside was sparse. A folding table, 2 chairs, a single lamp that cast more shadows than light. Sarah sat in one of the chairs and gestured for Mia to take the other. Dominic remained standing, his back to the wall, watching the door. Sarah said she was sorry about Elena. She said she had only met her once, briefly, but she had seemed like a good person, someone who actually cared about the truth. Mia felt tears prick at her eyes, but forced them back. She asked Sarah to tell her everything, and Sarah did. She said Victor Ashford was not just corrupt. He was building something, a shadow government of sorts, that could control every major decision in Chicago without anyone ever knowing. He had spent 2 decades placing his people in positions of power: judges, prosecutors, police commanders, city council members. They all owed him, and he collected on those debts whenever he needed something to happen or something to disappear. Elena had gotten closer to the truth than anyone before her. She had documents, recordings, evidence that could have brought the whole system crashing down. But someone inside the Tribune had warned Ashford, a journalist of all things, who was on Ashford's payroll. Sarah said that was how they had known about Elena's meeting with Pierce. The traitor had given them everything: the time, the location, the plan. They had grabbed Elena before she could even reach the meeting point. Mia leaned forward. her heart pounding. She asked where Elena was now. Sarah hesitated. She looked at Dominic as if seeking permission. He nodded once. Sarah said Elena was being held at a property Ashford owned on the outskirts of the city, an old mansion in the western suburbs that had been converted into something like a private prison. Ashford used it to hold people who had information he needed, people he could not simply eliminate without raising suspicions. She said Elena was alive. Ashford needed her alive because he believed she had copies of the evidence hidden somewhere, and he would not stop until he found out where. Mia felt a sob catch in her throat. Elena was alive. Her sister was still out there, still fighting. She asked Sarah how they could get to her. Sarah shook her head. She said the property was heavily guarded, surrounded by fences and cameras, and men who would not hesitate to protect their employers' secrets. A direct approach would be impossible. But there was another way. Sarah said Ashford was hosting a private event in 3 days, a gathering of his inner circle at that very mansion. The security would be focused outward, on preventing anyone from getting in, but if someone were already inside as a guest, they might be able to move through the property unnoticed. She said she could get Mia on the guest list. She said Ashford did not know what Elena's sister looked like, and Sarah could forge credentials that would pass any scrutiny. But it would be dangerous. If Mia were discovered, she would join her sister as a prisoner. Or worse. Mia did not hesitate. She said she would do it. Dominic spoke for the first time since they had entered the room. He said no, he said it was too risky. He said he would send one of his own people instead. But Mia turned to face him, and something in her eyes must have shown him the steel that had been hiding beneath her fear. She said this was her sister. She said she would not ask anyone else to take this risk for her. She said she was going, with or without his help. For a long moment, they stared at each other, two people from different worlds finding themselves bound together by circumstance, and something neither of them fully understood. Then Dominic exhaled slowly, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He said, fine. He said she could go. But he said she would not go alone. He would be there too, watching from the shadows, ready to intervene the moment anything went wrong. Mia felt something warm bloom in her chest. Gratitude, perhaps, or something more. Sarah cleared her throat. She said, there was one more thing they needed to know. She said the traitor at the Tribune, the journalist who had sold out Elena, was someone Mia had met before. Someone Elena had trusted completely. A man named James Hartley, Elena's editor. If you are watching this and feel your heart racing with anticipation, take a moment to leave a comment saying, I need to know what happens next. Let me know you are here, experiencing this story with us. The 3 days before Ashford's gathering passed in a blur of preparation that transformed Mia into someone she barely recognized. Dominic brought in specialists, a former intelligence officer who taught her how to maintain her cover under pressure, a stylist who created a persona complete with a backstory and forged documents, a security expert who mapped out the mansion and drilled her on every possible escape route. She learned to walk differently, to carry herself with the confidence of someone born into wealth rather than someone who had earned every penny through hard work and sacrifice. She learned to smile even when her heart was racing, to make small talk about politics and art and whatever topics might come up among the kind of people who attended Victor Ashford's private events. And through it all, Dominic was there, watching, guiding, supporting in ways that never felt intrusive, only protective. On the second night, she found him in the library, standing by the window with a glass of something amber in his hand. The fire had burned low, casting his profile in warm shadows. He looked tired, she realized, tired in a way that went deeper than missed sleep. She asked him why he was really doing this. She said she understood the part about his sister, about wanting to protect Elena the way he could not protect her. But there was more to it than that. She could feel it. He was silent for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then he set down his glass and turned to face her. He said, when he was young, before all of this, before the business and the power and the reputation, he had been just another kid from the South Side, with a sick mother and a sister who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. He said he had done things to survive, things he was not proud of, things that had set him on a path he could never leave. But his sister had believed in him. She had seen past the choices he had made to the person he still could be. She had been the one bright spot in a world that seemed determined to crush them both. When she was taken from him, something inside him had broken, but something else had hardened. He had vowed that he would build an empire so powerful that no one would ever hurt the people he loved again. And he had. He had become exactly what the world expected him to be, a man to be feared. But fear was lonely. Power was hollow without purpose. Eleanor had reminded him of that purpose. She had come to him not as an enemy, but as someone seeking truth, someone willing to see, past the headlines to the human being beneath. She had reminded him that there was still good in the world worth fighting for. He said he was helping Mia because Elena had helped him remember who he used to be, before the darkness, before the walls. Mia listened in silence, watching the firelight play across his features. She saw the pain he carried, the guilt, the endless weight of being someone the world had already judged and condemned. And for the first time, she did not see a man to be feared. She saw a man who had been wounded. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. Outside, the gardens lay silver under the moonlight, peaceful and still. She did not touch him, but she stood close enough that he could feel her presence, close enough that her warmth could reach him in the cold dark. She said she believed him. He turned to look at her, surprise flickering in his grey eyes. She said she did not understand everything about his world, and maybe she never would. But she understood loss. She understood the desperate need to protect the people you loved, even when the world made it impossible. She said whatever happened at Ashford's mansion, whatever came next, she was grateful. Grateful that he had opened his doors to her. Grateful that he had given her hope when she had none left. He studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "Thank you." They stood there together in the quiet library, two people from different worlds finding common ground in the darkness, and something shifted between them, something neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt. An understanding, a connection, the beginning of something that might become more. The night of Ashford's gathering arrived cold and clear, the kind of autumn evening that made Chicago sparkle like a jewel against the black velvet sky. Mia stood in front of the mirror in her room, studying the woman who looked back at her. The stylist had outdone herself. Mia wore a gown of midnight blue that shimmered like starlight when she moved, elegant but not ostentatious, expensive but not flashy. Her hair was swept up in a sophisticated twist, her makeup subtle but striking. Diamond earrings that probably cost more than her car glittered at her ears, on loan from a collection Dominic kept for such occasions. She looked like someone named Victoria Sterling, the identity Sarah had created for her, a socialite from New York, recently widowed, looking to invest in Chicago real estate. A perfect cover for infiltrating Ashford's world. But beneath the silk and diamonds, she was still Mia Lawson, still a high school teacher from the South Side, still a sister who would do anything to bring Elena home. Dominic appeared in the doorway, dressed in a tuxedo that made him look like a movie star playing a villain, which she supposed he was, at least in the public imagination. He said she looked ready. She said she did not feel ready. He crossed the room and stood before her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and warm that she was beginning to associate with safety. He said she was stronger than she knew. He said Elena had told him about her once during their conversations. She had said Mia was the bravest person she knew, even if Mia did not believe it herself. He said tonight, she just had to remember that. Remember that she was doing this for Eleanor. Remember that she had people watching over her who would not let anything happen to her. He said he would be there, not inside but close. His men would be positioned around the perimeter, monitoring every entrance and exit. If anything went wrong, she just had to get to a window or a door, and they would come. Mia nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. Then, impulsively, she reached out and touched his hand. Just a brief contact, her fingers brushing against his. She said thank you. For everything. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the mask he wore slipped away. She saw something raw there, something vulnerable, something that looked almost like hope. Then he stepped back, the professional distance returning. He said it was time to go. The drive to Ashford's mansion took nearly an hour, winding through suburbs that grew progressively more wealthy until they reached an area of private estates hidden behind walls and ancient trees. The mansion itself was invisible from the road, accessible only through a gated entrance manned by security guards who checked credentials with military precision. Mia handed over her forged invitation and held her breath as the guard scanned it. Seconds stretched into eternities. Then the guard nodded and waved the car through. She was in. The mansion was a monument to excess, a sprawling Georgian estate that had probably once belonged to some railroad baron or steel magnate. Tonight, it was lit up like a palace, every window blazing, the grounds patrolled by men in dark suits with the unmistakable bearing of professional security. The interior was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from vaulted ceilings. Artwork that she recognized from textbooks lined the walls. And everywhere she looked, there were people dressed in couture and confidence, the kind of people who moved through the world expecting it to make way for them. She took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began to circulate, just as she had been trained. She smiled and made small talk. She admired the art and commented on the architecture. She was Victoria Sterling, interested in Chicago, charmed by the evening, completely at ease among society's elite. But all the while her eyes were searching for two things. First, Victor Ashford himself. She needed to know what he looked like, where he was, how he moved through the crowd. Second, any sign of where Eleanor might be held within this vast property. She found Ashford before she found any hint of Elena. He was holding court near the grand fireplace, surrounded by admirers and sycophants who laughed at his every joke and nodded at his every observation. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 70, with silver hair and a patrician face that spoke of generations of privilege. He looked like someone's kindly grandfather, the kind of man who would give children candy and tell stories about the old days. He did not look like a monster, but Mia had learned that monsters rarely did. She positioned herself within earshot, pretending to admire a nearby painting, and listened to his conversation. He was talking about his philanthropy, about the hospital wing he had funded, about the youth programs his foundation supported. He sounded sincere. He sounded compassionate. He sounded like exactly the kind of person who could never be involved in corruption and disappearances. That was what made him so dangerous. An hour passed, then 2. Mia continued to work the room, gathering information through casual conversation, building a mental map of the mansion's layout. She learned which areas were off-limits to guests, which were monitored by cameras, which were patrolled by security. And she learned something else. There was a wing on the eastern side of the mansion that no one would talk about. Every time she tried to steer a conversation in that direction, people would change the subject or suddenly remember someone else they needed to speak with. It was as if that part of the house did not exist, which meant that was exactly where she needed to go. She waited until the party was in full swing, until the champagne had flowed freely enough that attention was divided and guard were relaxed. Then she slipped away from the main hall and made her way toward the eastern wing. The corridor was quieter here, the sounds of the party fading to a distant murmur. The decor changed too, from showpiece elegance to practical functionality. This was not a part of the house meant for guests. She passed closed doors and empty rooms, her heart pounding louder with every step. At the end of the corridor, a heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, light spilling from within. She pressed herself against the wall and listened. Voices. 2 men speaking in low tones. One said the journalist was becoming a problem. She still refused to give up the location of the copies. The other said Ashford was losing patience. If she did not talk soon, they would have to try more. Persuasive methods. The first voice laughed. He said he was looking forward to that. Mia felt nausea rise in her throat. They were talking about Elena. Her sister was here, in this house, being held and questioned and threatened, and they were planning to hurt her. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text to the number Dominic had given her. East Wing. Confirm location. Moving in. Then she took a deep breath, steadied her nerves, and pushed open the door. The two men inside turned in. Surprise? They were not security, she realized. They were something else entirely. Something in their eyes spoke of violence as a vocation rather than a necessity. She smiled brightly, playing the part of a lost guest who had wandered too far from the party. She said, oh, she was so sorry, she was looking for the powder room and must have taken a wrong turn. Could they point her in the right direction? The men exchanged a look. One of them reached for something at his belt, and then chaos erupted. Glass shattered as one of the windows exploded inward. Men in black tactical gear poured into the room, moving with precision and purpose. Dominic's men. The cavalry had arrived. Mia dropped to the floor as the room filled with shouts and the sounds of struggle. She crawled toward the doorway, her dress tearing on the rough carpet, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. A hand grabbed her arm, and she looked up into grey eyes filled with concern. Dominic. He was here. He had come for her. He pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arm around her protectively. He said they had to move. He said his men would handle these two, but there were more security responding. They had maybe 3 minutes before this whole wing was locked down. She said, Elena. She said she was here somewhere in this wing. He nodded. He said they would find her, but they had to go now. They ran through the corridor together, doors crashing open around them as his men swept the area. Behind them, alarms began to blare, red lights flashing in the darkness. And then, at the end of another hallway, they found it. A reinforced door with an electronic lock, guarded by 2 men who were already reaching for their weapons. Dominic moved faster than Mia would have thought possible for a man his size. In seconds, both guards were incapacitated, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. One of his men ran up with a device and went to work on the electronic lock. Seconds felt like hours. The sounds of approaching security grew louder. Then the lock clicked. The door swung open. And there, in a small room with bare walls and a single cot, was Elena. She was thinner than Mia remembered, her face pale, her wrists raw from restraints. But she was alive. She was conscious, and when she saw her sister standing in the doorway, tears began to stream down her cheeks. She whispered Mia's name like a prayer. Mia ran to her, throwing her arms around her sister, holding her as if she would never let go. She said she found her. She said she was going to take her home. Elena clung to her, sobbing, saying her name over and over. Dominic's voice cut through the moment, gentle but urgent. He said they had to leave. Now. They helped Elena to her feet, supporting her between them as they made their way through the chaos. Dominic's men had created a diversion at the front of the house, drawing security away from the eastern wing. They slipped out through a service entrance and into the cold night air. A black SUV was waiting, engine running, doors open. They climbed in, and the vehicle was moving before the doors were even closed. Behind them, the mansion blazed with light and noise, a hornet's nest that had been thoroughly stirred. But they were out. They were safe. Elena lay in Mia's arms, trembling, weeping, but alive, and Mia looked across the car at Dominic, at the man who had made this possible, and felt something she had never expected to feel for someone like him. Gratitude, trust, and something that felt dangerously close to love. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and revelation. Elena was taken to a private medical facility that Dominic assured them was safe, staffed by doctors who would not ask questions and would never reveal their patient's identity. She was dehydrated and exhausted and traumatized, but physically she would heal. The emotional scars would take longer. Mia never left her side. She slept in a chair next to Elena's bed, holding her, hand through nightmares, whispering reassurances in the dark hours before dawn. Whatever had happened in that room, whatever Elena had endured during her captivity, she would face it with her sister beside her. But Elena was also determined to finish what she had started. On the 3rd day, when she was strong enough to sit up and speak for more than a few minutes at a time, she asked Mia to bring her laptop. The evidence was still out there, she said. She had hidden copies in multiple locations, insurance against exactly what had happened. She said Ashford and his network had to be exposed. She said she owed it to everyone who had been hurt by his corruption. She owed it to Thomas Pierce, who had paid with his life for trying to do the right thing. She owed it to herself. But she could not do it alone. She needed help. She needed protection. She needed someone with the resources and the reach to go up against a man who owned half the city. She needed Dominic Caruso. Mia arranged the meeting, and Dominic came to the medical facility that same evening. He looked different than she had seen him before, less guarded, more human. The mask he wore for the world was beginning to crack in her presence, revealing the man beneath. He sat beside Elena's bed and listened as she explained everything. The scope of the corruption, the names involved, the evidence she had gathered, and where it was hidden. He asked questions, clarified details, took notes on a tablet that he would later encrypt and secure. And when she was done, he made a decision that would change everything. He said he would help her bring down Victor Ashford, not just because of the personal vendetta, not just because Ashford had tried to destroy him, but because it was the right thing to do. He said he had spent years building his empire in the shadows, accumulating power without purpose beyond survival. But Eleanor and Mia had shown him something he had forgotten. They had shown him that power meant nothing if it was not used to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. He said it was time to step into the light. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked together to prepare the exposure. Dominic's resources made things possible that would have taken months through normal channels. He had contacts at federal agencies who were hungry for a case this big. He had lawyers who could build an airtight prosecution. He had security experts who could protect Elena and Mia until the story was published and the arrests began. And he had something else, legitimacy that was growing by the day. He announced publicly that he was transitioning his business holdings toward completely legal operations. The foundations would expand. The shadier enterprises would close or be sold. Dominic Caruso was reinventing himself, and the world was watching with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. But Mia saw something the world did not. She saw the late nights when he would sit with Elena, making sure she had everything she needed. She saw the way he treated Rosa and his staff, not as employees but as family. She saw the donations he made anonymously to causes he believed in, the children from his foundation, whom he checked on personally, the quiet acts of kindness that never made the newspapers. She saw the man he was becoming, and she found herself falling for him. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning bolt from a clear sky. It was gradual, like the dawn. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, missing him when he was gone, feeling safer when he was near. She found herself noticing small things, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he helped Elena sit up, the sound of his voice saying her name. She did not know when caring had become something more, but somewhere along the way it had. Elena noticed, of course. Sisters always did. One afternoon, when they were alone in the medical suite, Elena took Mia's hand and looked at her, with knowing eyes. She said Mia was in love with him. Mia tried to deny it, to laugh it off, to change the subject, but Eleanor knew her too well. She said it was okay. She said she understood. She said she had seen the way Dominic looked at Mia too, the way he softened in her presence, the way he seemed to breathe easier when she was near. She said they had both found something unexpected in the middle of this darkness, a connection, a possibility, maybe even a future. She said Mia deserved to be happy. After everything she had done, everything she had risked, she deserved to find love. Mia felt tears streaming down her face. She had been so focused on saving Elena, on surviving each moment, that she had not allowed herself to think about what came next. But now Eleanor was safe. The story would be published. The villains would face justice. And Mia had to decide what she wanted. That night, she found Dominic on the rooftop of the facility, standing alone beneath a canopy of stars. The city sparkled below them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one carrying its own story of hope and heartbreak. She stood beside him without speaking, content just to share his silence. Finally, he said he had been thinking about the future. He said when this was over, when Ashford was behind bars and Elena's story had changed the world, he wanted to make some changes in his own life. He said he wanted to be someone worthy of the trust that had been placed in him. He turned to look at her, and in his grey eyes she saw something she had never expected to find in a man like him: hope. He asked her if she thought a man like him could change, really change, not just the business, but the soul. Mia reached out and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. She said she believed in second chances. She said she believed in redemption. She said she believed that every person had the capacity to become something better than they were yesterday. She said she believed in him. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. He said she had given him something he thought he had lost forever. She had given him a reason to hope, a reason to try, a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could build something beautiful on the foundation of everything he had destroyed. He said he was falling in love with her. Mia felt the world narrow to just this moment, just the two of them standing beneath the infinite sky. She said she was falling in love with him too, and there on the rooftop with the city glittering below and the stars shining above, they shared their first kiss. It was soft at first, tentative, two people discovering something fragile and precious. Then it deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into a single point of connection. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. He said this would not be easy. He said his past would always be there, a shadow that never fully disappeared. He said there would be people who would never accept her being with someone like him, who would judge and condemn without understanding. She said she did not care about easy. She said she cared about real. She said she had spent her whole life playing it safe, and look where it had gotten her. A small apartment, a quiet job, a life that felt more like existence than living. She said he had shown her another way, a way where courage mattered more than comfort, where love could grow in the most unlikely places, where broken people could help each other become whole. She said she chose him. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited, she chose him. He pulled her close and held her against his chest, his arms wrapped around her like a promise. He said then he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted that choice. The story published 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning that began like any other, but would end with shockwaves rippling through every level of Chicago society. Elena's article appeared simultaneously in the Tribune, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, accompanied by thousands of pages of supporting documents that had been verified by independent investigators and federal prosecutors. Victor Ashford was arrested at his home that same morning, along with 17 other individuals named in the investigation. The charges ranged from corruption and bribery to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The network he had spent decades building collapsed in a single day, its foundations rotten with secrets that could no longer be contained. The trial would take months, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were unimpeachable, and the public, hungry for accountability after years of scandal and disappointment, demanded justice. Ashford was convicted on all counts. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. James Hartley, the editor who had betrayed Elena, made a deal with prosecutors in exchange for testimony. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, but at least he would avoid the worst of the punishment. Elena chose not to attend his sentencing. She said she had better things to do than watch a coward try to justify his sins. She was right. She did have better things. The months that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding. Elena recovered fully, both physically and emotionally. She wrote a book about her investigation that became a bestseller, inspiring a new generation of journalists to pursue truth no matter the cost. She was offered prestigious positions at news organizations around the world, but she chose to stay in Chicago. This was her city, she said. She would not let the darkness drive her away. Mia returned to teaching, but her life was transformed. She was no longer the timid woman who avoided risk and dreamed small dreams. She had faced her fears and emerged stronger. She had saved her sister and found love in the most unexpected place. She had become someone she was proud to be. And Dominic. Dominic continued his transformation, proving day by day that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work. His foundation expanded, touching more lives than ever before. His business interests became entirely legitimate, a testament to the power of change. The man who had once been feared by half the city was now respected, even admired for what he had built from the wreckage of his past. He and Mia did not hide their relationship. There were questions, of course, raised eyebrows and whispered judgments from people who could not understand how a high school teacher had ended up with the former king of Chicago's underworld. But they did not care. What they had was real and rare, and worth more than any opinion. 1 year after Eleanor's rescue, on a cold December evening with snow falling softly over the city, Dominic took Mia back to the place where everything had changed. The Langham Hotel, the ballroom where she had first approached him, trembling with fear and desperate for answers. But now the ballroom was empty except for them. Candles flickered on every surface, their light dancing like captured stars. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the same melody that had been playing that fateful night. Dominic led Mia to the center of the room and took her hands in his. He said this was where he first saw her. This was where he looked into her eyes and knew that his life was about to change forever. He said she had come to him looking for her sister, but she had found something neither of them expected. She had found him. The real him, beneath all the walls and shadows. He said she had taught him how to hope again. She had taught him that love was not weakness, but strength. She had taught him that the past did not have to define the future. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life learning new lessons beside her. Then he lowered himself to one knee. He said, "Mia Lawson, will you marry me?" Mia felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy, of gratitude, of love so overwhelming it threatened to burst from her chest. She said yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple band of platinum with a single diamond that caught the candlelight and scattered it into rainbows. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness and promise of their shared future. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, but inside the ballroom there was only warmth, only love, only the beginning of forever. Elena was there, of course, watching from the doorway with tears in her own eyes. Rosa was there too, clutching a handkerchief and openly weeping with happiness. And gathered around them were all the people who had become family over the past year, Dominic's men, who had risked their lives for a woman they barely knew, the doctors who had nursed Elena back to health, the children from the foundation who saw in Dominic not a legend to be feared, but a man who cared about their futures. It was not the family any of them had been born into, but it was the family they had chosen, forged in fire and bound by something stronger than circumstance, and that made it more precious than anything they could have inherited. 6 months later, Mia and Dominic were married in a ceremony at the estate, in the garden where she had first glimpsed hope after so much darkness. Eleanor stood beside her as maid of honor, radiant and strong, a living testament to the power of courage and love. The guests were few but genuine, people who had earned their places through loyalty and heart rather than status and power. When they exchanged vows, their words were simple but profound. Dominic promised to protect her, to cherish her, to choose her every single day for the rest of their lives. He promised to be the man she believed he could be, even when he struggled to believe it himself. Mia promised to stand beside him through whatever came, to be his partner and his anchor and his home. She promised to love him, not despite his shadows, but because of them, because they were part of what made him who he was. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause that rose from the gathered guests was genuine and joyful, celebrating not just a union, but a redemption. That night, after the guests had gone, and the music had faded and the stars had come out over the gardens, Mia and Dominic stood together at the window of their bedroom. The room where she had spent so many sleepless nights, first afraid, then hopeful, then finally at peace. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She said she used to be afraid of the dark. He kissed the top of her head and pulled her closer. He said so did he. But not anymore. Not anymore. Because they had found something that burned brighter than any shadow. They had found each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The mansion that had once been a fortress became a home filled with laughter and love. Elena visited often, her career flourishing, her spirit fully restored. The foundation continued to grow, touching more lives with each passing year. And Dominic, the man who had once ruled through fear, learned what it meant to lead through love. 5 years. Later, on a sunny spring morning with flowers blooming in every corner of the garden, Mia watched her children play on the lawn. Twin girls with their father's grey eyes and their mother's stubborn spirit, chasing each other through the roses while Elena cheered them on. Dominic came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He asked what she was thinking about. She said she was thinking about how strange life was, how you could start out lost and afraid and end up somewhere you never imagined, how the worst moments could lead to the best ones, how a journalist's disappearance could bring together two people who needed each other more than they knew. He turned her to face him, cupping her cheek in his palm. He said she had saved him. She said he had saved her too. They both smiled because they both knew the truth. They had saved each other. And that was the most beautiful story of all. If you have watched this far, it is because you truly connected with this story. Leave a comment saying I watched until the end, so I can get to know you and see who really appreciates the stories here on the channel. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that love can bloom even in the darkest places. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel so you never miss another journey. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in stories. Until the next one.